Hello everyone. A couple of words about me. My name is Stan Petruk. I work as a senior VFX artist at Tuatara Games. Also create cinematics and make both live action and animated short films, along with other storytelling projects. And today I want to share the basics of dramatic structure, how it can help to create stronger, more meaningful game cinematics. So let's go into the actual stream, into the actual topic. Dramatic structure is the shape of the story, how it starts, how tension grows, and how it ends. Films and games use many of the same storytelling principles, but game cinematics have to work inside an interactive experience. In film, the viewer watches a character and identifies with them. In games, the player controls the character and becomes part of the action. So cinematics must connect clearly to gameplay and keep the story easy to follow. We look at dramatic structure on two levels, the full story and the individual scene. Then we'll see how this structure can help us design stronger, more meaningful game cinematics. In games, cinematics are used for different purposes. And let's talk about basic cinematic types. These are not official data, just an observation. So the first type is the story cinematics. They move the plot forward, reveal something important, or change the relationship between characters. Second are ambient or world-building cinematics. They show the world, the lore, or the atmosphere. They help the player feel the setting. And lastly, reward or victory cinematics. They appear after missions or achievements. They show results, celebrate progress, or close a gameplay moment. It can be as simple as the famous Mortal Kombat finishers, or can actually be a part of a bit more complicated story cinematic. But for this presentation, I'm focusing exclusively on story cinematics, because these are the scenes where understanding dramatic structure is the most critical. So what is dramatic structure? Dramatic structure goes back to Aristotle, who said every complete story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. This pattern is powerful because it mirrors life itself. We're born, we grow, we face challenges and change, and eventually our story ends. Because this shape feels natural, stories built this way feel satisfying. Freytag expanded this into rising tension and climax. Modern story theories like McKee and Sitfield describe structure as a planned emotional journey. In essence, structure is an emotional contract with your audience. When the story follows this shape, the audience subconsciously knows when to feel urgency, when to feel peak tension, and when to expect the relief or change. The visual representation of this Freytag pyramid, which clearly shows the moment of rising tension, it begins with the exposition, rises through the rising action to the moment of maximum tension, the climax, and then resolve in the following action and denouement. Structure isn't a formula, it's a tool. Once you understand the tool, you can use it or bend it intentionally. I want to say one important thing before we continue. Some of the things I'm about to show you may look like a checklist or a step-by-step formula, but structure is not something that locks you in. It's not a list of rules that kill creativity. In fact, great films and great games break structure all the time. The difference between good and bad storytelling is intention. If you break structure without understanding it, the story feels messy or confusing. If you break structure on purpose, the story feels surprising, artistic, or unique. It all comes down to knowing the rules well enough to break them, for a reason, not out of ignorance. So structure is not a cage, it's a guide. We are going to look at structure on two scales. The macro level is the structure of the whole story, the big arc that shapes the full game or film. And the scene level is the small arc inside each scene or cinematic. Both levels follow the same idea, a beginning that sets things up, a middle where tension grows, and an ending where something changes. Understanding both levels helps us design stronger cinematic. The most widely used structure is a 3-act structure. Act 1 is a setup. We meet the characters, understand the world, and learn the main problem. Act 1 also includes the inciting incident, the moment that breaks the normal life of the character and pushes the story forward. Act 2 is a confrontation. It's the longest part. The character faces challenges, obstacles, emotional pressure, and rising tension. This act is often defined by 2 major points. The midpoint, where the protagonist often shifts from being reactive to being proactive, and the all is lost moment, which is the emotional low point right before the final push to the resolution. This is where the main conflict grows and becomes harder to ignore. Act 3 is a resolution. The main conflict reaches its climax and resolves. The story ends in a new state. Some storytelling traditions, like Shakespearean theater, use a 5-act structure, but the underlying movement is exactly the same: a beginning, development with rising tension, and a resolution. Films and games can both follow the 3-act structure at the macro level. Not every game uses it, but story-driven games like The Last of Us are very close to film in this sense. They have a strong narrative from beginning to end, supported by many cinematics. So let's review some famous examples. For the film example, let's look into Star Wars: The New Hope. So Act 1 is the setup. We meet Luke on Tatooine, see his ordinary life, and learn about the Empire and the Rebellion. A key story trigger is when he discovers the message from Princess Leia. This pulls him towards the adventure. Act 2 is a confrontation. Luke joins the rescue mission, they infiltrate and escape the Death Star, and the danger keeps growing as the Empire closes in. Act 3 is a resolution. The final attack on the Death Star. The main conflict is resolved when Luke destroys it, and the story ends in a new state. So that was the film, and now let's move to the game. The example here is Last of Us Part 1. So Act 1 is a setup. We see Joel's life collapse in the outbreak. Then years later, we meet him again in the quarantine zone. The story really starts when the inciting incident forces Joel to take Ellie out of the city. This begins their journey. Act 2 is a confrontation. Their long journey across America, infected, hostile humans, changing seasons, and emotional growth. This long act is anchored by the midpoint, which is arguably when Joel is severely injured at the university, forcing Ellie to step up and care for him. This irreversible event changes their power dynamic and deepens their bond, driving the rest of the conflict. The obstacles become harder and their relationship deepens, which raises the stakes. So Act 3 is a resolution. Oh, thanks for the donation. Anonymous donated $20. Thank you. Act 3 is a resolution. The hospital climax and Joel's final decision. The main conflict resolves, and Joel and Ellie end in a very different emotional place. Then, comparing to where they started. Both of the examples show the same macro movement. A beginning that sets the things up a long middle full of rising conflict, and a resolution that changes the character and the world. But games are still different from films, because we play the character. Important parts of the story can happen outside of cinematics, inside the gameplay itself. That's why in games, the structure has to work together with gameplay, not only inside the cutscenes. Now let's zoom into the small level, the scene or one cinematic. A scene arc works like a small version of the 3-act structure. The beginning sets up the situation, who is there, where we are, and most importantly, what the character wants in this moment. The middle is where conflict or tension appears. The end is where something changes. A useful way to think about this... Oh, one more donation, thank you. A useful way to think about this: every cinematic must answer a micro question or achieve a micro goal. The end of the cinematic must resolve that goal and immediately set up the next one for the player. The change doesn't have to be big. It can be a new piece of information, a shift in emotion, or a new problem that appears. But if the scene changes nothing, It doesn't belong in the story. Those scenes are fillers, and removing filler usually makes the story stronger. And when I talk about game cinematic arc, I don't mean the cinematic on its own. In games, a scene arc is usually a combination of gameplay and cinematic bits working together. Part of the arc may happen during gameplay, the tension, the obstacle, the action, and another part happens in the cutscene, where we see the emotional payoff or the story change. So when I say a scene arc in game, I mean the whole dramatic moment as one unit, where gameplay and cinematics create one complete mini-story together. So keep this in mind when you work on a game scene. The cinematic is often just one part of the arc, not the whole thing. When you write your own scenes, it helps to check 3 things. Does the character want something in this moment? Is there some kind of tension or obstacle? And does something change by the end and move the story forward? If the answer is no, the scene probably needs work. To reiterate the idea, I want to show it visually. Both films and games can exist within the 3-act structure. They both have a beginning, a middle, and an end at the big picture level. In films, the structure is usually experienced as a continuous sequence. We move through the story from start to finish without interaction. Even though films can be complex, non-linear, or break structure in many ways. If you draw a line for a film, we can still represent it as beginning, middle, and end. Games can also follow this same structure at the macro level. The full game can have a setup, confrontation, and resolution, but games are different in how this structure is delivered. In games, gameplay and cinematics are mixed together. Story beats are spread across the experience. Some parts of the setup happen in gameplay. Some conflicts builds through player action. Some changes happen in cinematics. And some cinematics can work almost like the short film on their own, depending on their goal. They can have a clear beginning, middle, and end inside a single scene. So the 3-act structure still exists in games, but instead of living only inside cutscenes, it distributes across gameplay and cinematics, and cinematics bits along the whole experience. Now let's look at 2 short examples of the scene structure, one from a movie and one from a game, and see how each scene works like a small story with clear goals, conflict, and a change at the end. For the film, let's take a look at The Matrix, the scene where Neo meets Morpheus. In this scene, Neo wakes up in a strange room. At the start, he simply wants to understand what is happening. He finally meets Morpheus, the man he has been searching for. That's our beginning, a calm setup where Neo wants answers. Then the pressure grows. Morpheus offers him a choice, the red pill or the blue pill. The conflict here is really inside Neo, fear versus curiosity, or safety versus truth. This choice is the highest possible stakes, a decision between blissful ignorance and painful reality. This is the middle of the scene, where the tension rises. When Neo chooses the red pill, the scene reaches its ending. The world around him breaks apart, and everything he believed changes. This is the scene's final shift. Neo can't go back to his old life anymore. So in this short moment, we clearly see what Neo wants, what stands in his way, and how the choice leads to a major change. For the game example, let's go back to The Last of Us again, and let's take a look at the museum scene. This example is a mix of gameplay and cinematic moments, but together they form one complete scene arc. At the start, Joel, Ellie, and Tess enter the museum carefully. What they want is simple: get through the building safely. This is the beginning. Then things go wrong. Narrow opening collapses, Joel gets separated, and infected appear. The danger rises fast. The conflict builds through gameplay. Joel is trying to reach Ellie and Tess, and they are trying to survive. This is the middle, full of tension. At the end, after Joel fights through the infected, they reunite and escape the building. The immediate danger is over, and a small emotional shift appears in their dialogue. Joel starts to see Ellie as a bit more capable. So, even though most of the scene is gameplay, it still ends with a clear emotional beat and a complete arc. Both scenes follow the same logic: a setup, rising tension, a conflict that stands in their way, and a change at the end that moves the story forward. Scene arcs are important in games because they keep the story clear and focused. They help the player understand what the character wants, what the conflict is, and what has changed in the end of the moment. Games often jump between gameplay and cinematic, so clear scene arcs help us guide the player and keep the narrative moving in the right direction. And when a scene has a small beginning, some tension, and a change at the end, it naturally fits into the larger story and feels meaningful. This is what keeps cinematics from feeling random and makes the whole experience feel connected. When we are starting work on a new cinematic, you should use the 3 questions as a quick structural check. What's the change? What's the conflict? And what's the character's goal? If you can't answer them, the cinematic script probably needs another pass. In storytelling, conflict is very simple. A character wants something and something blocks them. The obstacle doesn't have to be a fight. It can be fear, doubt, another character, or any small problem that stands in their way. The character's want is the energy that pulls them forward. The block is the friction that creates drama. When something blocks the character, they must make a choice. That choice creates change, and the story moves forward. If the character wants nothing, or nothing is stopping them, then nothing happens. So conflict is what gives a scene energy and keeps the story alive. Let's also briefly talk about the character arc. A character arc simply means how the character changes during the story, how they start one way and end another. A character changes because they want something, and something blocks them. That conflict forces them to make choices, and those choices slowly shape who they become. This is the most important reason we use structure. It provides the framework for these conflicts and choices to happen at the right time. We care about characters because we identify with them. We want to follow someone who struggles, learns, fails, grows, someone who feels alive. If a character is flat, or if they say everything directly with no inner conflict, it's not interesting to watch or play. Good stories let us see the character react to problems, make decisions, and change over time. Every scene, even a very small one, moves the character a little bit forward. In games, this arc is built through both cinematics and gameplay. Cinematics show emotional shift, while gameplay shows the pressure and action that create those shifts. So the character arc comes from conflicts and the choices the character makes, and the structure of the story gives these moments the right place to happen. Before we move forward, I want to add one more idea about storytelling that connects to everything we've talked about. Structure, conflicts, and character. It's the idea of subtext. Subtext means a character says one thing, but feels or means something deeper underneath. Mark Burton talks about this in the book The Craft of the Character. When dialogue becomes too direct, too on the nose, the scene loses tension, and because the character isn't hiding anything, there's no emotional discovery for the audience. But subtext is not only in the words, it also happens in behavior. When character says one thing, but acts in a way that reveals the truth. For example, a character might say "I don't care" while doing something that clearly shows they care. The core dramatic tension here is the contrast between the inner truth and the external expression. The real meaning is carried by the action, not the sentence. The contrast between words and behavior creates tension and emotional depth. It adds another layer to the dramatic structure. The character wants something, something blocks them, and what they choose to express is not always the full truth. Some game genres don't aim for emotional complexity. They focus on action, systems, or pure gameplay, and simple dialogue fits those gameplay perfectly. It's not a flaw. It makes complete sense for the experience those games want to deliver. But in the types of games I personally enjoy, the ones with deeper storytelling, emotional cinematics, and strong character arcs, subtext really matters. It helps the scene feel alive, human, and dramatic. A simple example from The Last of Us. There are moments when Joel tells Ellie, "You stay back," or "Don't do that." It sounds strict or cold, but these actions, constantly protecting her, checking if she's hurt, looking at her longer than he should, reveal a growing attachment he refuses to admit. The dialogue says distance, but behavior says care. That tension is pure subtext. So when we talk about structure and character, subtext is one of the tools that can make even a short cinematic feel more meaningful. Let's talk briefly about what makes a cinematic feel strong. It's not a list of rules, it's just what many good scenes have in common. The first thing is clarity. A strong cinematic quickly tells us who is here, what is happening, and what the character wants in this moment. If you understand the situation right away, the scene feels smoother and more powerful. The second thing is emotion. Good cinematics don't just give information, they make us feel something. Tension, fear, hope, sadness, or relief. Even a small emotional shift can make the scene memorable. Another important thing is being connected to gameplay. A good cinematic doesn't feel separate from what the player just did. It reacts to the gameplay or prepares the player for what comes next. This makes the experience feel like one continuous flow. And finally, strong cinematics are about the character. They show how the moment affects the character inside, what it means for them. This is what helps us care about them and follow their journey through the story. When these things come together, clarity, emotional connection to gameplay, and the focus on a character, the cinematic usually feels strong, even if it's very short. So this is the main idea I want to leave with you. A good cinematic is not just animation or dialogue. It's a small story that creates a change and pushes the larger story forward. If you focus on clarity, conflict, and character, even the shorter cinematic can feel strong and meaningful. That's basically it, everything that I wanted to say. So thank you very much for listening. If you have questions, I can answer them. And as I'm the last here, so this is the final stream of the event. So if you want to add the last extra donation, please go ahead. Yeah, but as there's no questions, I think we can finish here. One more last donation from Tuatara. Thank you very much. Yeah, so thanks everybody for coming, and I'm just finishing the stream, I think.